Hi, in this lecture we will discuss conformity. What is the evidence, the empirical evidence for the idea that people conform to the opinions and behavior of others? Research on conformity is started in the 1960s. It was social psychologist Asch who studied what happens when others publicly express an opinion that is false. He designed a very beautiful experiment which consisted of 7 to 9 individuals. They gathered in a classroom and were instructed to match the line of the standard line with one of the 3 other lines. All participants except one were actors. They were instructed to respond with wrong judgments. For example, all would say that the standard line is similar in length to line 3. Which is clearly wrong, of course. But the key question for Asch was, does this majority opinion influence the opinion of the other participant? And the short answer is, yes it does. And specifically, in 37% of the trials, subjects conformed to the wrong estimates given by the majority group. And in a control group, in which subjects did not know the judgments of others, subjects made errors in less than 1% of the comparisons. So clearly, Asch has proved that people conform to the opinions of others, even when this majority opinion is wrong. Now, for sociologists, this was a very interesting discovery. But a key question was, do we find a similar pattern of conformity outside the lab setting? Let's review 3 areas of sociological research, namely family sociology, sociology of youth, and sociology of media and communication. In each of these areas, sociologists study conformity. In family sociology, scholars study if opinions and corresponding behavior are transmitted from parents to the children. And this idea is called parental transmission or simply socialization. And there's ample empirical evidence that indeed children have a tendency to copy what their parents think and do. This is found with respect to things like smoking, drinking, political attitudes, and so on. Now, to illustrate this tendency, consider this study in which scholars examined the parental transmission of generalized trust. Now, generalized trust refers to trust in people in general. So that, for instance, that you think that when you meet a stranger, you have a feeling you can trust that person. Now, what the researchers find is that if parents have very trustful attitudes, their children have more trustful attitudes as well. Now, this does not mean that parents and children have exactly the same levels of trust. It's a general tendency, and there are, of course, deviations from this overall pattern. Now, what about the sociology of youth? Now, in this particular area of research, scholars look at how peers influence each other. And the key finding is that students conform to their peers. So if their friends, for instance, drink a lot, they will tend to drink more too. The sociology of media and communication examines to what extent media messages impact people's opinions and behavior. And this idea has been strongly supported as well. Now, one famous example is what is called the Werther effect. And this effect is named after the novel The Sorrow of the Young Werther, written by German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in the 18th century. Now, after this publication, many stories appeared suggesting that people imitated Werther's suicide, so that, in other cities throughout Europe, suicide rates were increasing. Now, 200 years later, the sociologist David Phillips indeed showed that publications about suicides in the media can increase actual suicides. So when a newspaper publishes about a suicide, it appears that in the weeks after that publication, the suicide rate is higher than what you would normally expect. Phillips named this finding the Werther effect after Goethe's novel. And after Phillips, many other studies have shown this Werther effect. And that's why we call it the stylized fact. Now, when we take these 3 areas of research together, we can conclude that conformity is a more general phenomenon. It's not only happening in a small-scale lab setting, as Asch showed, but also in families, in peer groups, and when people are exposed to news. Now, this empirical pattern of conformity has been given multiple names, such as cultural transmission, imitation, or social contagion, and then, they actually refer to the same phenomenon. And because the empirical evidence for conformity is so strong and consistent, we can call it a stylized fact. Now, it's important to emphasize that conformity and social influence are not the same. Conformity is a specific case of social influence. So social influence refers to the process by which people's opinions and behavior are affected by others. Now, in case of conformity, people adjust their opinions and behavior of others in such a way that their opinions and behavior become more similar to others. So conformity is therefore also called positive social influence. Now, there can also be negative social influence, which means that people develop their opinions in the opposite direction to the opinions of their environment. In Chapter 6, we will review cases where this happens. So, conformity is a very powerful pattern in social life. People conform to the opinions of others, even when these opinions don't make sense. That's what Asch showed in the lab setting. And beyond the lab, sociologists find conformity in families, peer groups, and when exposed to media. Now, this pattern of conformity helps us to understand why cultural opinions and behaviors cluster in social contexts. For instance, why peers tend to have the same attitudes and values, why cultures differ across families and countries. Now, the key follow-up question is, of course, why do people actually conform? What is the reason people tend to copy the behavior and opinions of their environment? And we'll answer this question in the next lecture. Okay, thanks.